guys. As you know, my name's Mick Dawson, and in 2009, together with my friend and rowing partner Chris Martin, I had the honour and privilege of becoming the first and only boat ever to row across the North Pacific Ocean. 7,000 miles, 189 days, 10 hours and 55 minutes to complete, not that we were counting. And as you can see by that picture, we had a jolly old time. There's a theme that runs through that particular voyage and really runs through all my ocean rowing adventures that's pertinent for tonight. And that theme is fear. It's pertinent for tonight because fear is the single biggest catalyst for uncertainty. And fear ran through everything that I did, really. And I'd like to go through some of the things we did to show you how actually we approached that fear, how we dealt with it, and how we used it to achieve our goals. As much as this was the highlight of or the pinnacle of my ocean rowing career, it wasn't the start of it. That was way back in 2001, when with my brother I rowed 3,000 miles from Tenerife to Barbados across the Atlantic Ocean. We were former Royal Marines by that stage, looking for something exciting to do. That seemed to fit the bill. It took us 70 days to get to Port St Charles on the west coast of Barbados. 2 days before that picture was taken, we thought we were getting in just a few hours. We were on the east coast, approaching the island, thought we'd cracked it, and we got hit by a major storm. Even today, it's still one of the worst days I've had at the ocean rowing office. And we got smashed to bits for 24 hours just off the east coast of Barbados with the threat of being pushed onto the coast and wrecked and just being submerged by a big old storm in the Atlantic. It pushed us eventually north and west of the island. We didn't actually hit it, fortunately, but it meant when the storm decayed, we'd passed the island and we didn't think we were going to get into Barbados to finish. 24 hours before this picture was taken, we discovered that if we both rowed together, both of us rowing in both rowing positions together, we could make progress back towards the island. 400 metres an hour for the first few hours of progress. But we rowed together like that for 24 hours to get to that point, entering Port St Charles and finishing our Atlantic row. The guy taking the picture, as he took the picture, shouted to us and said, "Guys, your families are stuck in customs, so do you want to stay out here a bit longer until they arrive?" And we went, "Well, no, not really." We thought he was joking, to be honest, and we went in, and sure enough, there was a big welcome party, but no family. Got off the boat. I stood there. About 10 minutes later, a taxi pulled up. My brother's wife and kids got out. My dad got out. Dad came over to me, and I'll give him his due. The first thing he said was congratulations. And the next thing he said to me was, "Son, you'll never believe the journey I've had." Apparently Manchester Airport was a bit of a nightmare. I'd had quite a journey, and it was the start of a much bigger journey for me. 2004 saw me going alone to push off into the North Pacific to see if I could become the first person to row from Japan to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. If the theme of fear runs through all of my adventures on the ocean in rowing boats, the theme of one particular fear on that trip was the fear of collision. 4 times I rowed out from the bows of ships like that had just emerged over the horizon, that were pummeling down on me, didn't know I was there, and I literally escaped 30, 40, 50 yards in front of them. And one time, I came out of a week's worth of fog, which brings its own terrors, I can tell you. So relieved to see the blue sky again. Rowed for a few hours, looked over my shoulder, and there, right on top of me, was a Maersk container ship. It didn't actually have any containers on it, so it was quite low profile. And it was right on top of me. I knew straight away, because I got quite good at this, getting in front of the ships, I wasn't going to get past it quick enough. And worse than that, I was being pushed onto it. This ship was 370 metres long, it was enormous, and I was going to hit it. So I threw a drogue over the side, got onto the VHF, and I said, "Unknown vessel," at whatever position it was, "this is Ocean Rowing Boat Mrs D, I'm off your port bow, and there's a risk of collision." I could almost hear the guy falling off his chair as he was on watch. He immediately acknowledged the call and turned the ship to starboard. Unfortunately, by this stage, I was so close, that meant the back of the ship was now coming round to run me down. I got back on the radio again, I said, "Stop turning to starboard, just stay on a straight line, you'll pass me." He did, I'm pleased to say, and the drama passed, the ship safely passed a few yards away and disappeared into the distance. Now, by this stage on that particular row, I'd had no communications from day 12. So as bad as these incidents were, they did present an opportunity to get a message home. So I said to this guy, his name was Palios Henrik from the Faroe Islands, I said, you couldn't send a message home to my family, could you just tell them I'm all right? And he said, yeah, I'll do that for you. He said, can I ask you a question, Mick? I said, yeah, what's that? He said, what are you doing in the middle of the Pacific in a rowboat? I said, well, I was out fishing. And the last thing that man said to me before this conversation was all on the VHF, I never saw him, the ship was disappearing over the horizon, the last thing Palios said to me was, Mick, you English, you some crazy bastards. As lucky as I'd been that occasion, and the other 3 occasions, on 109 days into the voyage, my luck ran out. I still don't know exactly what did it, but it was in flat calm conditions. I was in the back cabin, the boat was rolled, it wasn't an impact, it was a wave that turned me over. The boat was rolled, and as it rolled with me in the hatch, me in the cabin, the hatch wasn't completely watertight, closed, water hemorrhaged in, and that stopped the self-righting movement. So what happened was, as the boat went round to come back up again, the water that got inside the cabin stopped that working. And I was inside like an agitated hamster trying to get it to go all the way, and it finally sat down on its starboard side. Basically the front hatch was half underwater, the rear hatch was completely underwater. The only way to get that boat upright again was to be outside. To be outside I needed to open a hatch. That was going to effectively sink my boat. It would still float, but it would be upside down. It was the end of the row. I knew I was in a survival situation. Everything from there on was basically quite scary. I coped with most of it fairly well, which is why I'm here today to speak to you. But there were 2 occasions during that whole period when I really was almost undone by fear. The first time was when I decided, after about 15 hours, well, actually probably a bit less than that, about 9 hours, that I was going to get out of the cabin. The boat was slowly going over. It was going to go over in the following night. And I thought, I don't want to be in here trying to escape in the dark. I'm going to get out under my own steam. And that meant opening the hatch and flooding the cabin. Now, fortunately, with the Royal Marine background, I'd done dunking drills, helicopter dunking drills. So it prepared me to a certain extent for what was to come. That's basically when a simulator hits the water, rolls over with you inside, and you bang the hatch out, and then you swim to freedom. Pretty much what I was going to have to do in this rowing boat. So I got myself ready, prepared myself, survival suit on, and I opened the hatch. My first thought was, Mick, this is a really bad idea. Freezing North Pacific Ocean immediately rushed in, transformed my life to chaos, and I could not get out. I had to stay calm. If I'd have panicked at that stage, I would have never got out of that cabin. I remained pushed up against the back of the boat as it fully turned turtle. This water rushed in, freezing cold water, got hit with cold water shock where you start gasping for air. Tried to control this all the time, trying to stop myself going for that hatch that I could never have got through because of this onrushing water. I got to the stage basically with the boat upside down. The last few inches of air were disappearing out of the cabin, and I thought, well, time to go. Let go. I basically gave in to the panic, went for the hatch and got outside just with my life raft. Set the life raft up outside, fortunate to get there if I'm quite honest, and then basically waited for rescue, which I thought would take 4 days. I was very relieved to be out there until it got dark. I'd had a shark running up the side of the boat, literally rubbing itself up the side of the boat the previous night. So when I was sat in a 4 foot by 3 foot life raft at the side of the boat in the pitch black, I was very alarmed when something started smashing into the bottom of my life raft. I can remember the hairs on the back of my neck going up, and all I wanted to do was jump out of that life raft, jump onto the upturned hull of the rowing boat that I was next to, and stand on my tiptoes and get as far away from that water as possible. That would have been pretty stupid, especially if I realised it was actually not a shark that was hitting the bottom of the boat, it was the oars that had come loose underneath the rowing boat. I remember saying to myself, get a grip, mate, because if you're panicking at this, what are you going to do when it's a real shark? Fortunately, I didn't have to wait for a real shark to come, because I didn't have to wait for 4 days for rescue. An aircraft from Alaska flew over me and brought a ship to me within 22 hours. It missed me the first time, went past me less than 100 yards away, couldn't see me in the darkness. Was redirected by the ship about an hour later. Came back the second time, I was halfway down the side of it, whistling and shouting, everything you're going to have in that situation. They finally saw me. It's a great big container ship. Guy got a light onto me, he said, "We've got you." Fantastic. He went, "But we're going too fast, so we're going to have to go, turn around and come and get you again." Well, it's progress. But unfortunately, as I then proceeded to drift to the back of the ship, or rather it drifted past me, there was an explosion of white water, a wall of water lifted out from the back of the ship where it came down and the ocean came up, lifted the rowing boat onto me, shredded my life raft, threw me into the water, and as the ship was disappearing for the third time, John Wick turned up, as the ship was disappearing for the third time, I was now treading water for England with no life raft. I clambered onto the upturned hull of my rowing boat and hung onto the rudder, and it eventually turned around and ran me down. That was the only way you could get close enough to me to get me alongside. I bounced down the side of that ship like some sort of maritime rodeo rider, and eventually got to a rope ladder that they put down, jumped off the hull of the boat, hung onto the rope, and watched my boat disappear into the night and the North Pacific. And then I clambered about 70 feet up this rope ladder to my salvation. Now I tell that story so that I can emphasise that fear is a part of everything that you do. It's coping with it that's the issue, not the fact that you've got it. Don't be afraid to be afraid, just make sure that react to it effectively. And when I got off, all I wanted to do was go back. There was nothing about that experience that told me I couldn't go across the Pacific and become the first person to reach San Francisco. The row had been fantastically successful, and I'd become unlucky on that freakish day at 109 days into the trip. More importantly, when I analysed how I'd coped with the rescue situation, or the capsize situation, I dealt with that well. So when I looked at it, I thought, I'll go back. I chose to go back, but there was one small problem. I didn't have a boat. When I got back to England, I was offered a job by these people who ran the Atlantic rowing race at this stage. You'll remember this race, some of you. James Cracknell and Ben Fogle were in it, and they did a documentary. I was the safety captain for this. Part of the job description was that I could build a boat to go back to the North Pacific. The other part of the job was to go to La Gomera in the Canary Islands and basically be the safety skipper for the early stages of the race and bring people back in, which is exactly what I did. I brought one of the boats back in the first night. Two guys came back in, towed him in with a boat. One French guy went home, the other guy stayed. And long story short, he basically said if I had somebody with some experience, I could get across this ocean. I agreed with him. I also thought a row across the Atlantic could be good training for going back to the North Pacific. So we got his boat, I jumped on his boat, and 6 days after the race, or the rest of the race fleet set off, we chased after him and rowed across the Atlantic Ocean. We got into Antigua, that was a destination for that row, in 60 days. I thought it'd be a good training run. It was. It was the worst weather on that route for 100 years. There were 26 boats that took part. 17 of them, including us, was capsized at one stage or another. All of them self-right, I have to say. 6 boats were lost completely. No crew, I'm pleased to say as well. I learned so much on that row, and the most important thing I learned was going back to the North Pacific as a double would make it much more likely to be successful than going on my own. And to that end, Chris Martin, who was in that race as a solo rower, I went to see Chris and I said, "You fancy going across the North Pacific?" I was wise enough to ask Chris to join me, and Chris was foolish enough to agree. And we went to Japan in 2009 as a double. Now people ask me what the difference between that transatlantic route, the mid route, the trade winds route, and the North Pacific. The easiest way I can describe that is I would urge anybody who wants to row an ocean to go and do that Atlantic rowing race. Anybody, it's fantastic. I wouldn't urge anyone to go to the North Pacific because that place will kill you. It is a world of difference from that warm weather trade winds route across the Atlantic. It's hostile. It's hostile from the minute you leave all the way across. It's vast. It's a 4,500 mile distance to San Francisco, but we rowed nearly 7,000 miles. That meant we were passing the same place frequently 3 times before we left it behind. The storms are big. You've got the typhoons on the Japanese side, and you've got the hurricanes on the American side. And there are all a number of navigational hazards you go across. When we set off, we immediately landed in a fleet of 50 fishing boats just off the Japanese coast. Ships, trawlers, everything that you've ever seen. We spent the whole night fighting our way through them. Chris said at the end of it, he said, "It's not going to be like this all the way, is it, Mick?" I said, bloody well hope not. And after that, we got halfway across, and we found ourselves in a huge eddy. It was 100 miles across, swinging around, and we were stuck in it, initially going the right way, and then it started to hang south, and we had to get out. So to save the whole row, because we'd have gone back 200 or 300 miles back to Japan, we punched out from this eddy and found ourselves in basically a forest of sea mountains just below the surface. Some of them only 11 metres beneath the surface of the ocean. It's the extension of the Hawaiian Islands. It was absolutely terrifying. The floor of the sea is normally 4 miles beneath you. Suddenly we had rocks 11 metres below us, 18 metres below us, and we were picking our way through. It was constant terror and fear getting through it. But we had to cope with that. We even had a fire on board, an electrical fire. I saw the smoke, fortunately. If you ever get the chance to hear Chris speak about this, he very flatteringly says, I saved his life. It's not strictly true. I haven't had the art to tell him. I was actually trying to get his wristwatch off when he woke up. But, it could have killed both of us in a sleep, but it didn't. We got through that, and the one thing about that North Pacific trip, more than any other trip, one fear that hung over it all the time, the worst fear of all in my view, is the fear of failure. That's a worse fear because it doesn't exist. It's a construct. It's in your mind. The other fears are something you've got to deal with. Fear of failure is a very modern fear, and it will stop you even trying at its worst. With failure, or fear of failure for me, put it behind you. Imagine it's trying to catch you up, driving you towards your goal. Never put it in front of you, because it will just become a hurdle for you to get over. Maybe a hurdle you can't get over. So fear of failure, especially in the last 6 weeks of that row, was hanging over us like a sledgehammer. We were 25 kilos lighter than when we set off. We were running out of food. We'd lost the race to beat the winter into San Francisco, and we were out in the North Pacific in October, going into November. We were rowing 2 hours on, 2 hours off, around the clock, utterly exhausted, literally within sight of the American coast. And we still didn't know if we were going to get in. But we had two really important weapons on board that boat. We were passionate about what we were doing. Now, passion's one of those weird words, but passion, all passion is it means you've got fuel to achieve your goals. If you're not passionate about something, then you won't achieve your goal. If you are, then you will. We were passionate. And we had belief. Now, belief is key, because belief will eradicate uncertainty. And we had belief in ourselves, belief in each other, an absolute belief that we were going to get this boat to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. That said, as we approached the American coast, I still didn't know if we were going to get in there. We were going to a point called Point Reyes, and as we were heading towards it, literally within sight of it, we were being pushed too far south to make the Golden Gate Bridge, which was 30 miles inshore of it. And then the wind changed. The wind was never in our favour the whole of that row. It occasionally went behind us, but it never went exactly the way we wanted. And when we were within 2 hours of definitely not making the Golden Gate Bridge, that wind came around and came directly behind us and gave us a chance to get in. As we got round Point Reyes, after surfing in front of these 25-mile-an-hour winds, past Point Reyes, we found ourselves next to a fishing boat. And he drove up alongside us, quite a big scene. He went, "You guys okay?" We went, "Yeah, we're fine." Drove around the other side, put his window down. He went, "Where are you from?" And I went, "Japan." And he put his window up and drove off. He didn't believe us. But the following day, we ended up beneath the Golden Gate Bridge. It was an epic journey of over 6.5 months. And every challenge that we'd had along that way, by overcoming them, it plotted the course to get into that bridge. Now, what I want to leave you with is a very important lesson that I learned. Fear is not a bad guy. It's not going to trip you up. It will if it can, but it's not there to trip you up. If you embrace it, if you acknowledge it, and you use it to teach you lessons how to cope with situations, it will plot a course to you to your own particular Golden Gate Bridges. Fear is not the enemy. Fear is a misunderstood friend. Thank you very much, guys.